Hello out there, Internet, and welcome to episode 56 of Funny Books Splatter, a horror comics podcast brought to you by HorrorTalk.com. I am your host, James Ferguson. This week's guest is Josh Finney, the writer of Casefile Arkham. If that title sounds familiar, it might be because I've previously spoken with Patrick McEvoy, the artist of the series, way back in episode number 20. Casefile Arkham is a series of original graphic novels blending Lovecraftian monsters with pulp detective stories. The second, Her Blood Runs Cold, is set for release on March 5th. I've read and reviewed both of them after backing the Kickstarter campaigns and really dug them. Josh definitely knows his stuff and shows a deep knowledge of horror and the detective genre. He did his homework for this project and it shows. I hope to see more stories in this world soon. Josh can be found online at his official site, jishirofinney.com. That's it for the introduction this week. Now let's dive into episode 56 of Funny Books Splatter with my guest, Josh Finney. So, although I did say that I wasn't going to ask, the same 5 questions that pop up in every interview, the way I do like to start the show is just asking you to describe your book. So if you had to describe Casefile Arkham to someone, like, on the convention floor or, walking in from the street, how would you pitch the book to them?
Easiest and most simple would be, what if Raymond Chandler wrote H.P. Lovecraft stories?
I love it. See, I love that succinct description of the book because that instantly puts it in mindset as to what you're getting into with it. But you've gotten 2 so far. Both of them, from what I understand, are like standalone, right? So although there's you're dealing with the same character, the same main character, Hank Flynn, the detective, mm-hmm. It's you can jump into either one without prior knowledge of them.
Right. I'm writing this in the same way the old pulps were written, in that there is a linear progression in the stories, but it doesn't matter. Each one is an individual adventure.
Yeah, I mean, the Casefile Arkham is near and dear to my heart because it does merge 2 things that I love in that. I've been diving deep into all of these new and old pulp stories, and seeing this kind of thing and then merging all the horror element is it's right up my alley with this kind of stuff. So, been a big fan of them both, and I backed both of the Kickstarters too.
Oh, thank you.
So I did make the mistake. Well, not mistake, but I start out in digital copies. So all right, I did that. And now I'm like, well, shit. Now I have to get physical copies of these because they're pretty good.
And I have to admit, black and white, actually it has to do with the fact that light is shooting out of the screen. Mm-hmm. Black and white looks better in print. Yeah. Well, what it is it has to do with the way the eye sees things. Light reflecting off the pages, you see it differently than if you were to see it with light coming out of the screen.
Yeah, I never thought about that.
So it just looks better.
Yeah, so now you're selling me some more. So I'm obviously gonna have to pick them up when they're available. But so was this the kind of noir pulp kind of stuff? Was this something that you were always into, or is that something that kind of you grew to love at a later age?
Yeah, it's kind of bizarre because I had a passing interest in it before the project. And then when I came to the project and just buried myself in the genre and read everything I could and watched every pulp I could find, from the most famous, the ones that go down in history that everyone remembers, like Maltese mm-hmm. Falcon, to the most just B-rate, nobody remembers it, or just the ones that only the aficionados know, like Detour.
Yeah.
And what I found was, in reading and watching all these films, it kind of informed and directed all these other things I was into. So it was kind of like realizing this was kind of the source code of all this other stuff that I already loved, and that, in a sense, I already was a fan of noir and never knew it.
Source code is a great way to describe it, because it's we don't realize it, but yeah, these are movies. The film noir kind of stuff came out in the 30s through 50s, and they were so influential right. because they were doing so much with so little. They had to get around the honor, the codes or whatever that they had at the time.
Yeah.
So it's all these things.
Decency codes.
Yeah, and they had to figure out cool ways to tell the story, and they were low budget affairs, so they did all those things, and ended up making really great stories as a result. So I think we see a lot of those in, like, I guess, quote unquote neo-noirs today, where they're harkening back to those older movies that, you know, didn't get like their total time to shine out there. But Detour, I do know, because I took a film noir class in college, and that was like one of the ones that the professor had shown us. And then since then, Warner Brothers, I think, had put out like a bunch of film noir sets, which I just like gobbled up, and it's like, you know, 5 or 6 movies for like $20, and just seeing like all these things.
Those are great.
They're great sets, yeah. And I'm like, all right, some of these I'd never heard of, but I'm like, I'm totally in. So.
Well, for me, what it was I had grown up thoroughly immersed in the cyberpunk genre, for instance. And now you go back and realize that would have never happened if it had not been for the old pulp writers, Chandler especially. You see that all over the way that the 80s cyberpunk was written, or a lot of cinema from that era. You suddenly look back and you realize, the obvious one, of course, being Blade Runner. But, you start seeing other films too. Like, this may sound nuts, but for instance, the original Repo Man film from the 80s, there is noir all over that. I'm trying to think of some others right off the top of my head. I'm a little fried after a long day of work, but.
Well, look, that kind of stuff will come up, I think. Like, do you have like a go-to of, like, if someone's just looking to get their toe into the water, with something like film noir, it's like, no, you need to watch this one. Like, this is where to start.
Oh, the one to start. That's kind of a difficult question. Believe it or not, this is a roundabout answer. I would start with the first noir film that isn't a noir film, but informed all others, and that's Casablanca. I mean, that really did. It's kind of, it has every reason to be a noir film, but technically it's not, and all the others took so heavily from it. So I would recommend Casablanca, and then probably move on to your Detour, Out of the Past. And, I'll be honest with you, since everyone had spoken so highly of Maltese Falcon, when I finally got to it, I was like, it's okay. I mean, I've seen others that are a lot better now, but one of my favorites is Cry Danger and Big Combo, and neither of those, outside of people who are into that, are familiar with it. Actually, you know what? See Casablanca and then see Big Combo. That would be my suggestion.
I don't know that I've heard of Big Combo. I'm going to have to look that one up now. I'm making my notes here.
Big Combo is unique because I would say it's probably the last true noir film to be made before things kind of transitioned over to super spies and, the late 50s and then into the 60s when it just kind of vanished or became understated and kind of just a niche thing. And what's interesting about Big Combo is it's in the mid 50s. It has it has everything that should be in a 40s film, except that it gets away with stuff that they could never put in a 40s film. And it's worth seeing in every way.
You sound like a film historian with the way that you've gone through and almost like cataloged these. So was this all part of like the research for Casefile Arkham?
Any project I do, I get obsessive about it. I feel like I should know it inside out. And so, yeah, I mean, just the first book specifically, I spent an entire year where I didn't watch any science fiction. I watched horror. I felt that counted, but I didn't watch any science fiction. I didn't really read any. I focused on reading, primarily, Raymond Chandler and, Elroy, who is modern, and then watching nothing but those old films. And also to get in the mindset of the characters, I kept my media and radio listening similar. I listened to old podcasts of radio shows of any genre of that era to kind of get the mindset of where those people were at and how they were talking. And then, yeah, I listened to a lot of film historians. I read books on it. knowing the history of both Lovecraft and what he was into, and then the history of noir, was really vital to making Casefile Arkham what it is. There was kind of an aha moment. I mean, the original idea that it came about is kind of different. Patrick had been well known for doing a lot of H.P. Lovecraft inspired artwork. He had done a lot of stuff for Chaosium. He'd done the Arkham horror board games and the Call of Cthulhu games. And so a lot of people were saying after we'd done this project called World War Kaiju, hey, are you guys going to do Lovecraft? And everyone kept asking, so, well, okay, we'll do a Lovecraft story. And I sat down and I came to the conclusion I really didn't want to do it because all of Lovecraft's characters, the story happened to them. They were very non-active. They were victims of the world. And often it was them telling you after the fact or waiting for doom to, the impending doom to crush them. And that just really did not seem like a point of view I wanted to write from. So I started talking to Patrick, and we had been going back and forth, and both of us, well, here we go in neo-noir, we both really loved both Angel Heart and The Lord of Illusion by Clive Barker. And we're like, well, what if we did that with Lovecraft? And then I'm like, yeah, because, a detective, unlike Lovecraft's characters, those noir detectives shove themselves into the situation. They drive the plot. They're not just going to sit by passively and let the world happen to them. Even if they're doomed, they're going to step out there and punch somebody. And it just went from there. And that really was the birth of the book. And then I started researching the subject matter in depth. And the aha moment for me that allowed me to write the story all was, one, realizing the first wave of noir occurred at the same time Lovecraft was writing, which was the 20s and 30s. It was all the stories, a lot of the stories that we now associate were written in the 20s through the 40s, but primarily the 20s and 30s. And then in the 40s and 50s were made into movies. So, a lot of what the early noir books or stories were about was that mind space, or the headspace of the Great Depression and the uncertainty after the war, and just the society changing around them, the Industrial Revolution, and just this inability to keep up, and this kind of sense that the world was caving in on itself, and that morals were kind of turning gray. That's where a lot of the noir stories came from. And at the very same time, Lovecraft was a reaction to all that as well, but in a different way. And then when the 40s came around and they started turning all these stories into films, they just updated it to the post-war America of the 1940s, which was still very relevant. And when I realized they both came from the same place, the same fears, it just, again, it came together. I knew exactly how I blend it, how I tell the story. And I really, with the character of Hank Flynn, try to embody the archetypical noir detective, or this guy who's come back from the war. He has no direction. He's just trying to get by. Everybody's trying to just figure out how to get by. That they all thought the world was going to be a great place once they took care of Hitler, and they come home and it's just as troubled. And then, while noir, you had the underbelly of the world, crime and drugs and, even suburban, domestic discord was an element of it. Lovecraft embodied it with monsters and cosmic terror. And we just fused it, and it worked. It worked far better than I thought it would.
Yeah, it's funny. It's almost like, well, why didn't anyone else think of this at this point? It seems obvious when you lay it out that way of no, this all goes together, and they're coming from the same spot. It's just a matter of putting the two together and telling, here's your detective story, here's your monster story, and now make a detective monster story. But
well, that was the other thing that I don't know. On the one end, I didn't read any of it, which is probably good because it's kept mine very different. But the occult detective is kind of an in genre right now.
Yeah, but what I mean is more of like that specific noir flair to it. I think you can look at characters like John Constantine or Steve Niles as Criminal Macabre.
Dresden.
Like they're out there as like this kind of maybe not noir, maybe like more of like modern day detective story, but less so of that kind of like hard-nosed private eye out in like in that specific time period kind of thing, because that has its own kind of look and feel to it. Whereas if everyone had cell phones in those classic Raymond Chandler novels, like things would probably be a lot different. Like if they were able to just call and find something out or hack into a computer or something like that to get surveillance footage. Whereas that specific era where they don't have that reliance on technology and stuff, it also works well with the monster side of it, because you have the world being a lot bigger then, because the idea of monsters, you're only relying on what you're seeing or what you're hearing from someone else, and it's not just like you can't just look it up on the internet or look it up on Google Earth and find out, oh no, there's nothing in Loch Ness, it's completely just a thing of water. But like that age before the internet and everything is a big deal.
That gets into something that I'll mention next. But yeah, getting back to the idea of that whole supernatural wizard detective thing is kind of a big genre. That is specifically what I wanted to avoid. What I had noticed about virtually all of them is that they were urban fantasy or urban horror first. The detectives were always wizards or witch hunters or people who knew about the supernatural, where I really wanted this to be a noir first, and the supernatural stuff just happened to be in this world. I didn't want our detective to have all the answers. I wanted him to be, a classic Chandler detective who just is now discovering that the world's a lot bigger and darker than he realizes. And also the other thing was, as often I found the magical elements were, there was always kind of a wink and a nod or kind of a cleverness to it in a lot of these stories that I really wanted to avoid. John Constantine, Steve Niles, those books are great. I really enjoyed them, but yeah, that is precisely what I wanted to avoid. I didn't want it to be anything like that. I really did want to make it feel like this could have come from the 40s, if not minus the nudity and some of the language. But getting back to you were saying, you can't go on the internet and figure things out easy. Our knowledge of the world was a lot more limited in the 40s. And so in the first book, when Hank Flynn, our hero detective, finds out that there are ghouls living under the city in the old sewer tunnels, that really isn't a huge leap, Okay, so there's an unknown species that we hadn't discovered. It's weird. It's a bit out there, but it's not exactly impossible. It's someone of that era could buy into it. And, back then there were a lot of weird ideas that people, it's possible. We haven't discovered everything in the world yet. Maybe there is a monster in Loch Ness. Maybe there is an abominable snowman.
It's more than just the alligators in the sewer.
Right, exactly. Or what was it? That's a lot of the UFO stuff back then. They just didn't know what they were seeing. So, okay, it came from outer space. Yeah. Why not? So I wanted that. That was very intentional, so that when we get around to book 2, and you've read
I've read
and
reviewed both of them. I like them.
Okay, good. Excellent. When he gets to book 2 and he starts encountering black magic and, what is it, cosmic gods, that's a much bigger leap of faith than, okay, there's an unknown species underground that eat people.
But
No, there are actual ancient cosmic gods coming down and making pacts with humans and raising the dead. Well, that's a bit much more to
but that
take.
also just can further expand his world and what he's doing. So while, he's not currently, an ace wizard or something like that, and I think that adds to the charm of the character, because he's an everyman in that case. He's trying to figure out his way in the world, and he kind of fell into this.
Exactly.
But, down the line, he might build up a more of a repertoire. Like, okay, this is he's not going to like write a textbook about monsters or something. But I think that he'll maybe hesitate a little bit less when he encounters something new and terrifying there. But that concept, though, like you said, I think it plays right into the core idea of what that kind of hard-nosed detective can be, because he's like, all right, this is the case I'm stuck with, this is what walked through the door I'm gonna do with this one, because I'm gonna stick to my guns and I'm gonna finish this case. I'm gonna see it through. I have to get the ending, it's like he's gotta figure that out. It's like something that's gonna eat away at him. Whereas, if someone is, hired because they're a supernatural wizard or something like that, it's less interesting, because it's like, all right, they know what they're getting into, whereas Hank doesn't. Like, it's like he doesn't know if it's going to be cosmic gods or werewolves or something. It could be anything.
And or maybe because there's always a possibility in other stories, they're just people who are part of a crazed cult,
I love that idea too, because
I don't ever want.
I love that idea too, because having those people like that is going to be, having a quote unquote normal case could be kind of like weird for him at this point,
Well, the idea is that he will grow more aware and more accepting of the world as he starts seeing more and more. But I never want him to be comfortable with it. It's always going to be he's conflicted. I'm going to keep him a Catholic, which will always put him at odds with it. And then on top of that, not only is he continually going to be at odds with this world that he's encountered, I allude to it in the second book, so this isn't a huge giveaway. Something has marked him. He's fated for this, and he doesn't really have a choice. It just keeps coming back, is kind of my idea.
Yeah, I mean, that can, again, playing into the expansions of the world, so that way people that are reading it from the beginning and going through each book, which I of course hope that there's plenty more, is seeing him kind of grow and develop and seeing whether he embraces this destiny or fights back against it.
And the accepting the world and, fighting that conflict, in a sense, I wanted to create the relationship with him and Glinda, the witch, is kind of that personified in a way that it's right there in front of him, and she's got all this knowledge, and she herself practices this stuff, and he's conflicted.
Yeah, and it's funny because, he doesn't have the internet, but he does have a witch who, runs an occult store, so it's like, all right, well, you basically went to the library, to get all your information. The old school way of doing it.
Exactly. And there's going to be more with that. Actually, I won't say too much about it, but I've already mapped out the third book.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my other questions, because it's like, all right, we have that, the second one, but I feel like that's always the shitty thing to ask in an interview. Like, hey, you just spent all this time and energy making this book, and it's just now coming out, but what else you got? What's next?
Well, I don't actually, if it will get people to give to the Kickstarter, if it'll encourage people to keep buying the book, sure, I'm willing to talk about it, because I've got a lot of these in me, and as long as people are willing to make it affordable for me to do them, I mean, as long as it's profitable and I can devote my time to it, I will absolutely keep writing them.
That sounds awesome.
I have never usually I write a one and dones. I don't ever plan to stick with a character, but these characters keep coming back. And when I finished the first book, it was hard. I mean, that was probably one of the hardest things I'd ever written. It felt like I'd spent a year.
What made it so difficult? Yeah, why was it such an endeavor?
Well, first I had to get to know the characters. Second, I had to become comfortable with the world itself. Actually, that wasn't that hard. Getting comfortable with the setting wasn't too difficult. it was primarily first getting the characters right, and then second, getting the lingo down. It is so easy for that noir style to become a cliche. It had to read real. I wanted it to read like Raymond Chandler's dialogue or thereabouts, without sounding like a parody or a knockoff, which is another problem with so many of these books. I've done slush reading, and I've received Cthulhu noir stories that just hurt. I was sitting in my office, and the light of the blinds was striping the walls like prison bars. Jesus.
Well, one, we could probably see that in the art, but but yeah, I think that's like putting it a little too, like you're leading too far into it. Like there should be more nuance to it instead of just saying exactly what you mean in every single one.
Yeah, so I slaved over that balance of making sure that it was never too over the top, that it was trying to hit those notes, try to keep the dialogue authentic and true to the characters and finding their voices. By the end of that first book, it was so much work, and I had thrown myself so much into the project. By the end of it, can we cuss on the show?
Go for it. Fuck yeah.
By the end of the book, I was like, fuck this book. I am done. Fuck this book. I want to go do something else. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to touch it. 3 weeks later, I'm laying in bed, and the entire plot of the second book pops in my head, and I get up in the middle of the night and start writing it. And I wrote the entire outline, and, here it is. The second book's here. And it was strictly because the plot popped into my head. It was partially formed, and it kind of demanded to be written, and the characters demanded to be written. So the book, here it is. And it happened again. I get to the end of this book, and I'm done. I want a break. I've got other things I want to finish, other things I'm focusing on. And, middle of the night, I'm thinking, and suddenly an idea pops in, and I've got the whole treatment written up now.
That's great. So it's just a matter of like, you kind of get struck by inspiration, and then you just kind of quickly jot it down. Well, I hope this wasn't happening like when you're in the shower or like driving or something, or you're in a spot where you're just like frantically writing down notes.
No, actually, the thing that clicked was there's a YouTuber named Razorfist who he has a channel called Rageaholic. And his stuff's really random. He has a whole series on, classic heavy metal history. Right now he's doing a retrospective on Deep Space Nine, but every now and then he'll do one on film noir because he loves it. And he was reviewing, Murder My Sweet. And it was watching him talk about why the plot functioned, and then suddenly a Lovecraft story was in my mind, and I saw how the two could be merged and how I could apply the noir structuring to it, and it was off and going. I was writing it down.
That's great. Now, I know you said you had some issues of sorts with Lovecraft, but were there like particular books that had stood out and was like, or rather, let me rephrase, were there are the Casefile Arkham stories like loosely based on any of them, or are they all like original ones, maybe just pulling from different aspects of that Lovecraftian mythos?
Oh wait, let me ask before we go any further. The first part, I have issues with. Did you say I had issues with?
Just in terms of how the characters kind of happen.
Oh,
yeah,
how they're
so
written.
I wasn't saying that criticizing them, but just like how the characters seem like shit just kind of happens to them.
Actually, now that I've done 2 of these and I have outlined a third, I'll get to that passive character. I'm finding that every book at some point, Hank Flynn sits down with the narrator of the Lovecraft story that I'm referencing and calls him out on his bullshit and says, screw you, you're lying. What are you not telling me?
See, that's like a nice way to like get back to it. So it's like you're addressing any problems you had with it. I'm just like, no, this is what you should have done. Like, come on now.
Yeah, both books have the part where our detective sits down with the narrator of the Lovecraft story and says, okay, well, you know too much to just be a victim here. You know something. What are you not telling me? Bullshit. I actually had him slap him. Was it Thurber got slapped around in the first one? But yeah, I wanted to do each one directly based around a Lovecraft story. The first one is kind of parallel to Pickman's model. The second one is a bit more of a re-envisioning of Thing on the Doorstep and merging it with specifically a Chandler story that I won't say because it'll ruin the plot for those who know. And that's actually how it happened. Was I don't know what it was. I was thinking about this Chandler story, my favorite by him, actually. I won't say what it is. And then Lovecraft's Thing on the Doorstep popped into my mind, and I realized how many parallels the two stories had. And I'm like, I could merge these. And then next thing I know, I'm writing it down. In this case, it was, at this point, I'd have to look at my notes. I don't even remember what it was in the review Razor Fist had done on Murder My Sweet that got it to click, but it caused the third one to be written out, and it took me to a place that I had always swore I'd never go in this setting, and that is Call of Cthulhu.
Okay. That's, Sorry, no.
Sorry?
I was going to say, like, it's interesting. Like, it's, how these things can kind of take you in different directions.
But I might have wandered off. What was the question? You had asked if these were based specifically around Lovecraft stories. Yeah, what I want to do with each one is tackle one or two of his stories, and usually it's based around one main story, and then I'll have minor elements of others. I so want to do more with Herbert West. I just think there's a wealth of fun there. I'd like to do something with Shadow Out of Time at some point. Patrick is, his favorite is Color Out of Space, and there's all sorts of things that can be done with that. At one point, I was toying with the Dunwich horror, but when I started outlining that, I realized this would have to come way later in the series, so I just set it aside.
Well, at least you can kind of mark those for something later. Like, yeah. Now, I also couldn't help but notice in the books that there are definitely some lookalikes for celebrities from the noir time period. There was that intentional, or were those things where it's like, well, let's put this kind of guy in here. He's a guy that should pop up in here, whether it's someone that looks like Humphrey Bogart or what. But I noticed a lot of character actors too that I'm like, oh, that guy, I've seen him before.
Well, I wanted it to feel. Again, I wanted it to feel like this really could have been something that came out of the 40s, or could have been on the screen in the 40s. And so the actors, all dead so that we don't get sued. Well, wait a minute, one of them isn't, never mind. The actors by and large were intentional. And the other thing was for the nature of the story, there's just something about an expressiveness that you can often get from a photograph or a reference than an artist just cooking it right out of his head. And so, basing Flynn's look roughly on Robert Mitchum, that meant that Patrick had a wealth of movies that he could go back to and say, well, okay, what's he look like when he's pensive? What's he look like when he's mad? And, these people, part of their skill as an actor is emoting. So it made sense.
Yeah, it's like, and then just as when you were immersing yourself in all this, it's like all these movie watching and stuff is all research then. So it's like, no, I'm done working. This is all part of the process. But I did
absolutely.
like that you're the way you described it earlier in terms of how your approach to this, in terms of listening to older radio and reading these old books and everything. It's like a method actor for writing. You're like the Daniel Day-Lewis of comic book writing in that case, just kind of like completely like putting yourself in that mindset of someone in that time period to get into the mind of that character.
You're not the first person to have actually said, so you're, what would you call this, method writing? And I guess so, because, it's with any project I do, and I do mean any project, that is just part of the process, is one, researching the hell out of it, and then surrounding myself, with that era, or genre, eat, sleep, and breathe it constantly. The second book, I tapered off a little. I did watch sci-fi. I did, enjoy some other stuff. I didn't spend a year just doing nothing but reading, 40s literature and watching 40s movies and television and radio, but not television, but you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. And with other books I had done, it was kind of similar. I mean, with World War Kaiju, it was nothing but reading up on Cold War history and watching old kaiju movies and studying the history of that. For Titanium Rain, it was constant research into the Air Force and global politics. And I mean, it can be tiring, but in the end, I feel it's rewarding. People notice it. And often when I read something that I know a lot about and a writer just wings it, and there's a glaring mistake, it's hard to get over.
Right, but I think it lends an air of authenticity to it, because that way it feels much more genuine, and it's not, like being like, like you said, someone kind of wings it. It's like, yeah, this is close enough, right? But it's like someone that is a fan of either Lovecraft or noir stories is going to notice it and realize this isn't really it, and that's the audience you want, because you're gonna pull someone in with that log line you had before about Chandler writing Lovecraft stories. But if they get in there and they recognize, no, you're full of shit, then no, they're not going to come back. You want them in for the long run.
Absolutely. And it has paid off. It is always satisfying when people notice. And the biggest compliment I've gotten repeatedly is, no, this is really a noir story. I mean, there's other stuff where it's like kind of noir or phoned it. No, this really is a noir story. And it's like, okay, yeah. I did my job. Good.
Yeah, no, I think it definitely hits that from the amount of noir stories I've seen and read. It hits all those marks. It's pretty damn good. So it's well done in that case.
Okay.
Now the design for some of the monsters and creatures that pop up in the book. So how is that collaboration between you and Patrick? Are you are you well, I guess if you have like a Lovecraft kind of story you're looking at, you have all of his descriptions, but to bring them to life in an actual image, are you saying like, I don't know, make something like that, like really freaky, or like picture your nightmare and draw this on the page, or is it more of a collaboration back and forth in terms of designs?
Actually, that's a great question, because so many people, when they think of, how do you do a comic, there's usually two methods. There's one where you trust the artist and you work with someone who already has the same passion for the project and feels it and has an instinct for it. And then there are people where you have to just describe everything. And going into this, I very much wanted this to be a project where there were lots of times that I could just tell Patrick, just do this, and trust that his instincts were going to be right. And I wanted him to take risks and surprise me, and which is, the process that we do is kind of bizarre. I don't really send him scripts very often. I actually send him layouts with speech bubbles in them and lots of reference, collages and sketches and reference material, and let him go from there. And it's all a suggestion, but that way he knows how much room he has on the page to work with around the text. But yeah, a lot of it, like the ghouls, that was completely Patrick's design. I had zero description as to what they looked like. It was completely his instinct. The characters, if I had a specific actor in mind or a specific look, I told him, but that was only in a few cases, like making Thurber in the first book, making him Peter Lorre was completely Patrick's idea. I had no description of him. It was just go with it. And that was a very, very pleasant surprise. The second book, I was really open, let him just go with anything. except, and this is probably why you're asking, except Shub Nibbleroth. And I was very, very specific about Shub Nibbleroth because there really isn't a lot of description of Shub Nibbleroth in any of Lovecraft's work, and everything is kind of apocrypha. Other people came up with it, and often it seems, from what I researched, a lot of Shub Nibbleroth's portrayals later on were based on misreadings of what Lovecraft was saying. All we really knew is that Shub Nibbleroth was some sort of pagan fertility goddess. And there's this whole thing about she rides astrode the black goat of the woods. And somewhere along the line, that got confused with she's a burning, smoking cloud with goat legs and eyes and mouths coming out.
Yeah, I could see how you would confuse the two.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
And I believe that had to do with August Derleth or some other writer. I don't remember who. But in Lovecraft's original work, it's really vague. All you know is that it's a pagan fertility goddess. So I said, okay, we're going to do something else. We're going to do it really disturbing. I want this to look like the Venus of Willendorf, this ancient fertility symbol of the pregnant, overweight woman who's bountiful and lactating, and we'll save it for those who read the book. Certain readers have complained.
Well, they should have an idea of what they're getting into. Like, again, authenticity. Yeah. It's. I also want to say I admire your pronunciation of some of these Lovecraft terms because I butcher it every time I try to even get in there, and I'm like, oh, I'm like I don't know what I'm saying. I just got Cthulhu, okay, like, and now I'm like all the other things. We have a C is for Cthulhu book, and it's like it goes through all these things, and I'm like I just do my best in it, and I'm like, but there were no vowels in that word, but we're just gonna go with it.
Yeah. The only reason I can say them correctly is that this is probably going to be blasphemy to the hardcore fans. I'll probably lose all my cred. It's difficult for me to, unless it's a short story, it's very difficult for me to actually read through Lovecraft's writing in print. But hearing someone read it is a totally different experience. And so any of his longer works, I've listened to the books, the audio versions read by Wayne June, and he's just a master at it.
No, I don't think in this day and age, I don't think that's any issue whatsoever, because you're actually ingesting that. I've had trouble getting into it to begin with. Is my thing. Like I've started and stopped so many times in a number of his works, and I've read a number of adaptations of Lovecraft stuff. And a number of a ridiculous amount of books that have been inspired by his work, but like in actually just sitting down and trying to read the straight text, it's been daunting to get through.
Yeah. I'll be upfront. Some of his writing is way overwritten, and occasionally he's trying way too hard to make it sound antiquated. There are other times when I've come across work of his where he just kind of lets loose and writes it, and it's like, well, wait a minute, your work can be really accessible. Why can't you do this more often?
That's the more marketable stuff.
But then like you hear about like Herbert West, which is one of his easiest reads, he hated.
So maybe that was just his thing, but like I think you can't like deny the influence he's had and like the world building idea that he had on the genre and what he was able to do for it. But it's just like, I guess if you're able to take something from it or something like that, or see the inspiration that it's caused, then all right, like I can get behind everything like that. But I don't know. I do have to do the due diligence and actually just hunker down and read some of that stuff too, because like it's all unfortunately for whatever estate he might have had, it's all just public domain now, because it's just so you can get like just about anything. You can get the complete works for literally nothing now.
Yeah. Well, I would say if it had not been for that, he probably would not have endured. There was probably two factors working in his favor. That being is that his mythology is just incredible. Even if the writing is sometimes difficult to get through, the mythology and the ideas were so ahead of their time and so forward-thinking, and just concepts that even now are just now becoming, comfortable in our cultural lexicon. He was so cutting edge. He had quantum physics factoring into his stories that wouldn't show up again until, the 80s and 90s, when people actually started, okay, I can get what he was getting at, or understand what he meant when he was thinking that. I'm sure you've seen Carpenter's Prince of Darkness, right? That was loosely inspired by some of the stuff Lovecraft had done, putting quantum physics into his stories. Which, to think about it, it just blows me away that he was apparently reading tons and tons of journals, so he was on the cutting edge that way. But the other thing that worked in his favor was the public domain meant that all these other amazing writers kept his works alive. Putting Stephen King, Robert Bloch, Harlan Ellison, Matheson. I mean, you go down the list, all these great writers wrote stories in his universe, and you're inevitably going to go back and go, okay, where did this come from?
Yeah, like was that an original Lovecraft, or was that something that someone took a tidbit of it and then blew it out later on?
Yeah, I mean, apparently The Fog, It, and The Stand are directly influenced by Lovecraft. Sometimes I have trouble seeing it, but I trust Stephen King when he says so. Apparently, Randall Flagg he's said it's Nyarlathotep a few times.
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, I know that Stephen King's noted that influence a lot, so hearing that is not unsurprising. Yeah, this is it's funny. Like I feel like I've learned so much from just talking to you both about the literature side of it and the noir side of it. I'm like frantically taking all these notes. It's rather intimidating going through, because I'm like,
really?
Oh, okay, all right, I hadn't heard this thing. All right, I'm gonna have to look this up. So yeah. This is all good, I think. But I am very excited to hear that you have more planned for Casefile Arkham. Again, I know that it can be a jerk thing to say as on the eve of the latest book officially being released as a physical copy, but it's currently available in digital. But it sounds like, are you going to keep it still in this kind of a graphic novel format moving forward?
I would absolutely like to, and I would, I really don't want it to stop being in graphic novel format. Again, it just comes down to sales. As long as people keep buying them, we'll keep doing them. That said, I would like to write a few novelizations just to do it, and possibly expand the universe some. The second book, there are scenes I had to cut because I just didn't have the space for them. So if I novelize it, I can put them back in. But, I would love to see this continue on for another 10 years, if possible, maybe doing one every year or every 2 years. And for you to say, okay, well, what do you have next, is actually a huge compliment, because it means you liked it enough. You want the next one to be available. And in that regard, I'll ask you a question then, because it had a lot to do with where the series went the second time around. What really stuck out to you about these two books, or what is it that really caught you? Like, I want to know more about that, or what did that mean? It's
honestly the whole look and feel of it. Like, I just love the world that you've created here, is what it comes down to. So it's like, there is limitless possibilities in terms of what Hank Flynn can encounter. And again, like what I said before, you got the mix of that noir and the Lovecraft angle is just so intriguing that, yeah, I'm like, okay, do more of those things. Even if it's, just grabbing, all right, with the Maltese Falcon, but he's finding Cthulhu. Like, okay, do it. Yeah, okay, I'm there. Here's my money. Let's do it. So that idea is just like so intriguing that, like, yeah, I could see this just churning out again and again, because I really love the concept and the characters and the artwork, like everything works in such a great way that I'm like, yes, I just want to see this continue on and on.
That's about the best endorsement I can possibly get from anybody. That's great to hear. And I don't know. Do you have any other questions?
That really does it, man. I'm pumped. Like I said, this was almost intimidating going through this because I'm like, okay, like you've more than done your homework when it comes to this. So if anyone's listened to this and had any doubts whatsoever, but like, I don't know, can they really do something with Lovecraft and this, like, the answer is obviously yes. You know your stuff. You're not bullshitting anybody, and based off of, as evidenced by the first 2 graphic novels, it's some solid workmanship there. So I'm definitely looking forward to more. But for now, both titles are available digitally, right? Right. And the second one though, that one's Her Blood Runs Cold, right? That's the second one. That one is also available digitally, but will be available in physical format on March 5th. Oh, sorry. One thing I did want to ask. Right. So when we're talking about, the reason why I asked about graphic novel there was, would you ever have plans to like serialize it? Because there are all these services out now like Webtoons or Taptastic and things like that you can maybe just serialize it. So it's like, all right, here's a page here, it's a page there, and almost like maybe collecting it down the line as well as instead of having to put all of it at once and kind of here's the graphic novel all together at the same time.
I wouldn't, mainly because I don't really work that way. Often I will do the process that Patrick and I do is I'll write him the draft, and as I said, I kind of do my own layouts and speech bubbles and narrations. And I'll write the whole thing out, and we're doing it page by page. And once all the art's done, I go back through and I'll read the whole thing as one piece and rewrite it again. And so in that sense, it would be very difficult to keep the quality up if we were releasing page by page, because again, by the end of it, I'm going to go back to the beginning and change things and move things around. And it's just not my process.
Yeah, no, I was just curious because there's all these different methods now, and I you guys have taken the Kickstarter route, which has been great so far. I mean, like you more than surpassed your goals for both of the campaigns, raising thousands of dollars. So it's like all good there. I'm always curious of other avenues that creators are exploring now, because the barrier of entry has gotten so much lower that like anyone can make a comic now. Yeah. And get it out there in some shape or fashion in the world. So that's great. Really, the only things that would impede us monetarily, just again asking with the Kickstarter thing, is there's a certain level of quality that I just refuse to accept. There's a certain level that has to be reached in the printing. I'm not going to let this cannot be printed on subpar paper or have a subpar cover. So there's always going to be a certain cost in getting these books printed, because we're not going to do print on demand. We always do, offset printing to make sure that it's of highest standard. But other than that, what we want really is to maintain a direct line of communication with those fans. And if we can talk to them directly, if we can do something that gets the book directly to them, within a month the book comes out, that is perfect. Quality through and through. That's it. And again, like I said, maybe I'll write a few, novellas in the setting as well, and have Patrick do like illustrations for them or something. But the main goal is to just keep this world alive and keep building on it. There's so much there. As you can see clearly, there's still the mystery of whatever the hell happened to Hank Flynn while he was in the Pacific. What's with that scar? What's with the mention of they keep mentioning that something's marked him and has decided has uses for him. What's that about? There's definitely going to have to be something where events culminate in Innsmouth with the mob, who are the Innsmouth mob. And then there's the whole backstory of Glinda, which
There is a ton there.
See, these are all fantastic teases for future Casefile Arkham stories. Like, I couldn't ask for anything better to try to wrap this up. But aside from, like, we'll link up the places to buy the book online in the show notes. But where are the best places for folks to find you online?
I actually keep a blog at J. Ishiro Finney. And if there's any confusion about the name, why it isn't Josh Finney, I made the tragic mistake when I first started out, not considering the name Josh Finney would stick in everyone's mind and in every search engine as Jack Finney, who wrote The Body Snatchers, which has definitely been a problem over the last decade of, well, you know, Josh Finney, Jack Finney, one's a mid-tier comics writer, the other is one of the most famous sci-fi writers of the 20th century. That makes it a bit difficult.
That's understandable. So I had a guest on the show. He goes by M.L. Miller. He writes a book called Grave Transfers, but his real name is Mark Miller. Which, if you know, like, there's this little-known comic book writer named Mark Miller out there who's written a handful of these small books like Kick-Ass and Secret Service and stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, so he's like, my name's also Mark Miller, but like, what am I gonna do? You know?
Exactly. Actually, it's like I ran into this guy and I really felt bad for him that I guess he wasn't very well read, but he was writing horror and his name was Richard Matheson.
Oh man.
And he was writing under his own name.
Yeah, but you're gonna have to change that. he'll figure it out sooner or later when
All right. Well, you can, I do a blog at jishirofinney.com, and I've got a ton of stuff there. I try to put stuff up at least weekly. I've been doing an ongoing series of articles about the nature of writing horror fiction, why people enjoy it, and what horror films in the past had affected me. And I'll also do stuff about, like, the industry, about how the industry works, about breaking in, stuff like that.
That sounds great. I'm going to have to check that out. Cool, Josh.
All right.
Sorry, go ahead.
Hey.
Yeah,
thanks for bringing me on.
Thanks for chatting with me. This was a lot of fun. And again, Casefile Arkham, the second book, Her Blood Runs Cold, available on March 5th. Pretty much, Amazon and whatnot, wherever books are sold, it sounds. Ask for it by name, definitely. But Josh, thanks again, for chatting with me. This was really fun, but I think that wraps it up then for this episode of Funny Book Splatter. I have been James Ferguson with my guest, Josh Finney. You've been listening to Funny Book Splatter, a horror comics podcast brought to you by HorrorTalk.com. We've been bringing you the best in horror since 2002. In addition to comics, we cover movies, TV shows, books, and video games. We've got news, reviews, guest features, interviews, unboxing videos, and much more. Be sure to sign up to Steve's Deals newsletter to increase your horror collection without breaking the bank. Check us out at HorrorTalk.com and at HorrorTalk on Twitter.